Hey, what is up? Alex here from MetaMind Music, and welcome to the first video of our video series in exploring compression and compressors, where we're going to go and dive into all the parameters and the nitty-gritty details and all the knobs and how they work of a compressor so that you can best understand it and master it in your music and your productions going forward. So I'm working with Ableton, and I have a compressor loaded, and I have it expanded so that we can actually see the incoming audio signal. And I have a hi-hat that's just set to loop so that when I play it, you can see those little side-scrolling mountains, which represent the transient peaks. And the two most foundational settings that I want to talk about in this video is the threshold and the ratio. And these two settings combined definitely dictate how the compressor is going to act the most. And basically, we'll start with the threshold, which is represented by this blue line that I'm moving around. And this is basically a level that you set that once the incoming audio passes the threshold you've set, then it tells the compressor that it's going to act on that signal. So basically, if I lower this threshold until the incoming audio passes it, the compressor is set to start working. But as you can see, we're not getting any gain reduction, which is represented by that orange line here, because of our other setting that we're going to talk about, which is the ratio. And the ratio is basically how much compression is going to happen once the threshold is exceeded. So right now it's set to a ratio of 1:1, which means that for every 1 dB of input signal, the output is going to be 1 dB, which means nothing is going to happen. It's basically what's coming in is equal to what is going out. But if we go ahead and increase this to somewhere close to 2:1, now for every 2 dB of audio that passes the threshold, there's going to be only 1 dB that is outputted, right? So now we're going to get some compression. And I'm going to turn off this makeup setting here, which we'll get into later, just so we can get a good representation of what's going on here. So now that I have a ratio of 2:1 and I lower this threshold so that the incoming audio is past it, you'll notice that these little dips in this orange line here is how much gain reduction is happening, with how much volume is being turned down. And basically the lower threshold that I have, right, the more gain reduction that happens. So this setting of a threshold is very much subjective, and you have to start listening for what you're going after once you use it. But basically, once an audio signal passes that threshold, it's going to be affected by how much of the ratio is set. And at a ratio of 2:1, like I explained, for every 2 dB of input, there's going to be 1 dB of output. But you can increase this ratio to a higher setting, something like 4:1, which would be typical for something like vocals or maybe some bass, something it's compressing a lot, but it's not extreme yet. And if you'll notice that increasing that ratio increases the gain reduction we experience. And if I increase this to all the way infinity and play, it's even more gain reduction, right? And that's kind of relative to where this threshold is set. And the different ratios that you use basically is depending on what different sound source you're using, right? Like if you want something to, let's say like bass guitar or vocals that are typically very dynamic instruments, meaning that like when somebody's singing, they're going to be singing a lot louder and a lot quieter just naturally, because that's how the human voice kind of is recorded, and how we speak and sing is that our volume fluctuates a lot. And same with bass or bass guitar or bassist, unless you're recording like a master bassist, there's going to be quite a bit of variation in volume when you're recording a bass guitar. So something like compression at a ratio of 4:1 will just help even out the dynamics of that sound signal, right? Because it will take all the louder parts and bring it lower, and you're going to perceive the more quiet parts as being louder relative to the louder parts, if that makes sense. And we'll dive into that into a later video. But basically, that's all I want to cover in this one, is basically just understanding that the threshold and the ratio is going to be how much compression is going to happen and at what level. And just remember that if your threshold is set to above your incoming audio signal, or your audio signal doesn't pass your threshold, your compressor is not doing anything. And also, if you have a compression ratio of 1:1, that even if your threshold is set to a super low value, there's also no compression happening. Okay, so just keep that in mind and know that those two parameters are the foundational, and just start playing around with that, and you'll start to get a better understanding of how a compressor kind of works with the incoming audio signal. And before I leave you for this video, I want to encourage you to download my free Workflow Wizardry PDF, which will help you kind of structure your approach to finishing a song, from your first ideas to your composition to getting your first kind of mix down going and getting a finished product, all by following a simple framework to keep you on track. And I'm also going to include a free compression cheat sheet, which is going to go over all the parameters that you'll typically see in a compressor and how to best utilize them and their best practices. So until next video, we'll talk to you soon.